Hello. We are back here with Command Figures.
Yes, we are.
Today, we are opening up a file that is honestly heavier than anything we've touched in a while. We are looking at a figure who essentially defines the DNA of modern South Korea.
It's a massive topic. You really can't overstate it. We are talking about Park Chung Hee.
Right.
And it's the ultimate case study in political duality. I mean, to one side of the aisle, he is the demigod of development, the absolute architect of the miracle on the Han River.
Taking a nation that was statistically in worse shape than most of sub-Saharan Africa in the 1950s.
Exactly, and dragging it, sometimes kicking and screaming, into becoming a global industrial titan.
But then, to the other side of that same aisle, he is the ultimate villain.
Absolutely.
A brutal military dictator who suspended the Constitution, kidnapped dissidents, tortured students, and ruled with an iron fist for 18 years.
That's the tension right there. It's almost impossible to talk about South Korea today without talking about Park.
You mean regarding Samsung, K-pop, the geopolitical situation?
All of it. His shadow is cast over everything. And our mission for this deep dive is to try and hold those two highly conflicting realities in our heads at the exact same time. We're going to walk through his timeline chronologically.
From the moment he seized power in that chaotic coup.
Right, through the mechanics of the economic explosion, the really dark turn into absolute dictatorship, and finally his dramatic, bloody assassination at a private dinner party.
Which sounds like a movie script, but the stakes were real lives. And looking at the stack of sources we have today, it's pretty intimidating.
We have a lot to get through.
Yeah, we've got historical records of the 1961 coup, declassified diplomatic cables regarding the very tense U.S. relations. We have academic papers on developmental state theory,
which we will definitely unpack.
And some very granular minute-by-minute accounts of the assassination itself.
We even have transcripts regarding how modern leaders, like Indonesia's Prabowo Subianto, view Park as a role model.
Right, showing this isn't just dusty history.
Exactly. It's a playbook that is still being studied by aspiring leaders globally. We have to look at this impartially. We are not endorsing any of the violent or authoritarian methods described in these sources.
No, definitely not.
We are simply reporting on what the historical record and the academic analysis tell us about how this state was built and at what cost.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start at the very beginning. Before he was the general, before he was the president, who was this guy?
So Park was born in 1917 in a place called Gumi. And you really have to understand the context of his birth to understand his psychology later on.
Because he was born dirt poor.
Unbelievably poor. His father had actually participated in a failed peasant rebellion years earlier and was essentially destitute. And this is when Korea was under Japanese occupation.
And it wasn't just a typical colony.
No, it was being actively erased culturally. The Japanese Empire was trying to assimilate Korea entirely.
So for a kid like that, growing up in rural poverty under a foreign empire, what are the options?
There were very few. I mean, if you wanted to eat, if you wanted to get ahead, you basically had to navigate the Japanese system.
You had to play the game.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Park was smart. He actually started out as a teacher.
A primary school teacher?
Right. But he was incredibly ambitious. He saw that the real power, the real path to influence lay in the military. So he did something that would severely haunt his reputation later in life.
He joined the Japanese military?
Specifically, he joined the Manchukuo Imperial Army Academy.
And Manchukuo was the Japanese puppet state in Manchuria.
Yes. So he wasn't just a soldier, he was an officer trained by the Japanese Imperial Army. He even went by a Japanese name, Takagi Masao.
Takagi Masao.
And he graduated at the top of his class. This is absolutely crucial because it's where he learned how to build a state.
Japanese model.
Right. Their model in Manchuria was all about state-led industrialization and total societal control. He absorbed that completely.
So the blueprint for modern South Korea was actually drafted in a Japanese military academy?
In many ways, yes. The sources note how much he admired the Meiji Restoration in Japan. You know, how a group of samurai transformed a feudal country into a modern industrial power.
He wanted to be that samurai for Korea.
Precisely. But there is a huge twist in his early career that often gets glossed over, and it is absolutely wild.
Right, the twist. Tell us about what happened after the war.
So after Korea was liberated in 1945, the country was in total chaos. The U.S. was occupying the South, the Soviets were in the North. Park came back and joined the newly formed South Korean Constabulary.
The early version of the South Korean army.
Yeah. But in the late 1940s, during something called the Yosu Sunshin Rebellion, he was arrested.
Arrested for what?
For being a communist.
Wait, hold on.
I know.
The man who is historically famous for being a staunch, almost paranoid anti-communist was arrested for leading a communist cell.
Yes, he was actually embedded with left-wing factions in the military, and he was sentenced to death.
Sentenced to death? How did he possibly get out of that?
This is the moment that reveals his true character, I think. He was a pragmatist above all else. Ideology was a tool, survival was the goal.
So what did he do?
He survived by giving up names.
Wow.
He cooperated entirely with the investigators, revealed the entire network of leftist officers within the military, and in exchange for that intelligence, his life was spared.
He sold them out to save his own skin.
He did. And the U.S. military advisors on the ground saw his talent and thought, he was too valuable to kill, assuming he had been officially converted away from communism.
But that must have left a mark on him.
A permanent chip on his shoulder. He had to prove for the rest of his entire life that he wasn't a communist. Our sources indicate this drove his absolute obsession with security and anti-communist purges later on.
Because he knew what they were capable of, and he knew how easily he could be accused of being one of them again.
Exactly. It puts a whole new spin on his later policies.
Okay, so he survives the purge. He fights in the Korean War. Let's fast forward to 1960. The war has been over for 7 years. What is the state of South Korea at this point?
It's a basket case. Syngman Rhee, the founding president, was overthrown in the April Revolution of 1960.
That was a massive student uprising, right?
Right. The students rose up against his election rigging, and Rhee fled to Hawaii. A new democratic government came in, the Second Republic, led by a man named Chang Myon.
Democracy. That sounds like a happy ending.
You would definitely think so. But it was completely paralyzed. The economy was completely stagnant. We were talking about a GDP per capita of maybe $80.
$80 a year?
People were literally starving. There were protests in the streets every single day. The police had absolutely no authority anymore because they had been discredited under Rhee.
And importantly, the military was angry.
Very angry. Because of corruption and stagnation. The senior generals were widely seen as fat cats who were just stealing American aid money.
And for ambitious younger officers like Park,
who was a major general by then.
Right, there was a bottleneck.
Exactly. They couldn't get promoted because these corrupt old generals were clogging up all the top spots and refusing to retire.
So you have this volatile mix of genuine patriotism, where they think the country's going to hell, and personal ambition, where they just want to be in charge.
It's always a mix. Which leads us directly to the May 16 coup in 1961. The declassified records give us a really detailed look at the mechanics of this. It wasn't a spontaneous uprising at all.
Park had been planning it
meticulously.
It wasn't a surprise to anyone?
It was an open secret in Seoul. There was a May 8 plan that got aborted, then a May 12 plan that was actually leaked to the press. The rumors were everywhere.
If everyone knew, why did the civilian government just stop him?
This brings us to a really fascinating figure known as the Invisible Hand. Army Chief of Staff Chang Do-young. The sources heavily suggest he knew all about the plot. Park actually went to him and told him about it.
To his face.
Yes, but Chang Do-young didn't arrest him, and he didn't explicitly join him either, he just waited.
Hedging his bets.
Exactly. If Park wins, he says he was with Park the whole time. If Park fails, he arrests him and looks like a hero. It was a massive failure of leadership at the very top.
So let's go to 3 a.m. on May 16th, 1961. Paint the scene for us.
Imagine it. Seoul is dark. Park Chung Hee, wearing his signature sunglasses, which he sometimes wore even at night, and a military field jacket, is leading about 3,600 soldiers.
Mostly Marines and paratroopers.
Right. And they are heading straight towards the center of Seoul.
But to get there, they have to cross the river.
They have to cross the Han River Bridge. And this is the cinematic moment of the whole coup. There are about 50 military police guarding that bridge, loyal to the civilian government. And they see the Marines coming out of the dark.
3,600 against 50.
The odds were clearly with Park, but the MPs actually opened fire. A firefight breaks out on the bridge. Park gets out of his Jeep. The sources say he was remarkably calm. He just walked right across the bridge amidst the confusion and the gunfire. The Marines pushed through the barricades, scattered the MPs, and once they crossed that bridge, the road to the Blue House and the radio station was wide open.
They seized the radio station, EPS. That's always step one in a coup playbook, isn't it?
Control the microphone, absolutely.
Oh, what did they broadcast?
At dawn, the people of Seoul woke up to a broadcast from the Military Revolutionary Committee. The pledge they read was very specific.
Let's hear the points.
Point 1. Anti-communism is our #1 national policy. Point 2, we will strengthen ties with the U.S. Point 3, we will root out corruption. And point 4, we will solve the economic desperation of the people.
How did the U.S. react to this? I mean, Kennedy was in the White House, he was a Democrat. He couldn't have been happy about a rogue general toppling a newly formed democracy.
Initially, the U.S. commander on the ground, General Magruder, was absolutely furious.
He wanted to fight back.
He wanted to mobilize the U.S. troops and the remaining loyal Korean troops to crush Park right then and there. He actually went to the Korean president, Yoon Po-sun, and said, "Give me the order to attack."
And what did President Yoon say?
He hesitated. He said, "Maybe this is the will of heaven."
The will of heaven.
He wanted to avoid a bloody civil war in the streets of Seoul.
Right.
And without the Korean president's explicit backing, the U.S. military couldn't just start shooting at Korean soldiers.
So what did Washington do?
Washington eventually did the math. They looked at the chaos of the previous civilian government, they looked at Park's incredibly strong anti-communist stance, and they decided that regional stability was more important than local democracy.
So they just accepted it.
They accepted it as a fait accompli. Kennedy quickly confirmed friendship with the new regime.
So Park is in, and he establishes something called the Supreme Council for National Reconstruction.
That sounds very intense.
It was very intense. It was a complete military junta. He also established the KCIA, the Korean Central Intelligence Agency.
Modeled after the American CIA, in name, but not in function. He put it under his relative and right-hand man, Kim Jong-il.
This is crucial for our deep dive because the KCIA wasn't just about catching foreign spies from the north.
He was domestic.
It was a tool for total domestic re-engineering. They immediately arrested thousands of what they called hoodlums, corrupt officials, and political opponents. They literally paraded them through the streets in humiliation.
But Park didn't rule as a general forever. He eventually took off the uniform.
Right, there was immense pressure from the U.S. to return to some form of civilian rule. They didn't want to back a permanent junta. So in 1963, Park retired from the military, put on a suit, and ran for president as a civilian.
And he won.
He won, but it was an absolute nail-biter. He won by only 1.5% against the former civilian president.
Which shows the public was really divided on him.
Highly divided, but he had the mandate. He was the legitimate president now.
Okay, so that brings us into the mid-60s.
Yeah.
He has the power. Now he has to deliver on that big promise from the radio broadcast, fixing the economy.
This brings us to part 2 of our deep dive, the developmental state. My question is, how does a military general know anything about economics?
He doesn't. And he fully knew he didn't.
Right.
But he knew organization and he knew discipline. Park didn't believe in free markets in the Western sense at all, the invisible hand of the market.
Sure, Adam Smith.
He believed in the visible hand of the state. He treated the economy exactly like a military battlefield.
Yeah.
You set a target, you identify the resources, and you take that hill at all costs.
So this is what scholars call guided capitalism.
Exactly. The government sets the strategy, and the private sector is essentially drafted to execute it. But here is the mechanism that really matters, and it's something people often miss when studying this era.
What's the mechanism?
Park nationalized the banks.
Oh, why is that so important?
Because in a developing country, capital cash is like oxygen. By taking control of the banks, Park controlled the oxygen supply for the entire country.
So if you were a businessman and you wanted to build a factory, you needed a loan.
Right? And you couldn't just go to the open market. You had to go directly to the government.
He had them by the throat.
He absolutely did. And this is exactly where the cables come in. The massive family-owned conglomerates like Samsung, Hyundai, LG.
They already existed then.
In smaller forms, yes. Park actually called in the heads of these companies shortly after the coup. Some of them had actually been arrested by the KCIA for corruption.
And he makes them a deal.
He makes them a deal. He says, I won't put you in jail. In fact, I will give you cheap loans, electricity subsidies, and total protection from foreign competition.
There's always a but with Park.
But you must meet the export targets that I personally set for you.
And this is export-oriented industrialization, EOI.
Exactly. At the time, most developing countries were trying import substitution, meaning they were trying to make their own soap and cement to stop buying from abroad.
Keep the money inside the country.
Right. But Park looked at Korea and said, no. We have no natural resources, no oil, no timber. We only have people. So we are going to import raw materials, make things with our cheap labor, and sell them to America and Europe.
I read about these export promotion meetings he held. They sound honestly terrifying.
They were legendary. Once a month, President Park would sit at the head of a huge table in the Blue House. The ministers of economy were there, and the heads of all the major chaebols were there.
Like a boardroom meeting.
But with the power of the state. They had big charts on the wall. If Samsung met its target, the chairman was praised publicly. But if they missed the target...
Was it just public shaming?
Much worse. Park would literally cut off their credit lines. A tax audit would magically start the next morning. It was life or death for these companies to hit those numbers.
There is a great anecdote in the academic papers we reviewed about a conversation between Park and the American futurist Herman Kahn.
Yes. Park supposedly told him, "I don't know economics, I'm a soldier. But I know how to squeeze wisdom out of businessmen."
Squeeze wisdom. That is a very polite way of saying threaten them until they perform.
It was brutally effective. They started with light industry. Wigs, textiles, plywood, things that just needed cheap, diligent labor.
But Park wanted more than just wigs.
He wanted heavy industry, steel, chemicals, massive cargo ships. The international experts, including the World Bank, explicitly told him he was crazy.
Why?
They said, Korea has no iron ore, no coking coal, and no capital. You cannot build an integrated steel mill.
But he did it anyway. That's POSO, right?
He did. POSO became one of the biggest steel producers in the world. But this brings us to the dark side of the funding. You need massive, massive amounts of hard cash to build a steel mill or a highway system. Where did he get it?
This is the highly controversial part. Japan.
Yes, the normalization of relations with Japan in 1965. You have to remember, the brutal Japanese occupation had only ended 20 years prior. The hatred ran incredibly deep. People felt Japan had never properly apologized.
But Park needed the money for his economic war.
So he signed a treaty normalizing diplomatic relations.
The public must have gone ballistic.
It was total chaos. Students were in the streets by the tens of thousands calling him a traitor, a collaborator. They called him the second Lee Won-young.
Who was that?
The historical figure who signed away Korea to Japan back in 1910.
That is a heavy insult.
Park responded by declaring martial law and using the military to suppress the protests. But he pushed the treaty through and he got the money.
How much money?
Japan provided $800 million in grants and soft loans.
That is a staggering amount of money in 1965.
It was massive. And this is where his developmental state theory really kicks in. Unlike leaders in other developing nations who might have pocketed that money into Swiss bank accounts, Park poured every cent of it into national infrastructure.
So he used the Japanese reparation money to build the Gyeongbu Expressway.
Right, yes, the massive highway connecting the capital Seoul to the southern port of Busan. And he used it to build POSCO. He literally used what the public saw as blood money to build the country's economic backbone.
And Japan wasn't the only source of controversial funding. The other source was the Vietnam War.
Right. President Lyndon Johnson in the U.S. desperately needed allies on the ground in Vietnam. Park saw an opportunity and sent troops.
A lot of troops.
At the peak, South Korea had the second largest foreign military force in Vietnam, right after the U.S. Over 300,000 Korean soldiers rotated through that war.
And in exchange for this blood sacrifice?
The U.S. paid the Korean soldiers' salaries directly in U.S. dollars, which were almost entirely remitted back to the Korean government. Furthermore, the U.S. gave Korean companies huge service contracts for construction, transport, and logistics in Vietnam.
So Hyundai and companies like that got their start building infrastructure in a war zone.
Exactly. It was an enormous injection of hard currency. It completely jump-started the heavy industry transition. But again, we have to recognize it was paid for with the lives of thousands of young Korean men.
So the miracle on the Han River was built on Japanese grants, Vietnam War contracts, and the sheer grit of the Korean worker.
And we really cannot forget the workers in this equation. The conditions were horrific.
The sources outline some really grim labor statistics.
We are talking about 16-hour workdays, no weekends, poverty-level wages in these massive sweatshops, and the government violently suppressed all independent labor unions to keep wages low and exports competitive.
And this leads to a really tragic turning point for the labor movement.
In 1970, a young garment worker named John Tail was desperately trying to get the government to enforce its own basic labor laws. When he was ignored, he doused himself in gasoline and set himself on fire in the Peace Market in Seoul.
God.
He was shouting, "We are not machines," as he died.
That's a heartbreaking image.
It was a massive shock to the system. It showed the undeniable cracks in the miracle. The macroeconomy was booming, but the actual people doing the labor were suffering immensely.
So we move into the 1970s. The economy is exploding, but the politics are getting much tighter. This is part 3 of our deep dive, the Yushin era. My question is If the economy was doing so well, if the GDP was skyrocketing, why did Park decide to go full dictator? Why not just win democratic elections based on his economic record?
It comes down to paranoia and deep insecurity. Two major things happened right at the turn of the decade.
Okay, what was the first?
The Nixon Doctrine in 1969. President Nixon announced that the U.S. would start pulling its troops out of Asia. He essentially said that Asian nations need to be responsible for their own ground defense against communism.
Mark must have felt totally abandoned.
He was terrified. He saw North Korea, which was actually highly militarized and aggressive at this point, as an existential threat. And he felt the American nuclear umbrella was just folding up and leaving.
And the second thing?
Domestically, the 1971 presidential election, Park almost lost.
Even with the economic boom.
Yes, because people were tired of the corruption and the heavy-handed tactics. His opponent was Kim Dae-jung, an incredibly charismatic orator who railed against the dictatorship.
And how close was it?
Kim Dae-jung got 46% of the popular vote.
That's way too close for comfort for a strong man.
Way too close. Park realized that as the country got more educated and richer, a middle class was forming, and they would naturally demand more political freedom. He decided right then he couldn't ever risk another fair election.
So he changes the rules.
Completely. In October 1972, he performs what political scientists call a self-coup.
A self-coup.
He was already president, but he declared martial law, rolled tanks into Seoul, dissolved the National Assembly, and introduced the Yushin Constitution.
And Yushin means restoration, right? Like the Meiji restoration we talked about earlier.
Exactly. It was a direct callback to his Japanese training. The Yushin Constitution was essentially a legal framework for absolute dictatorship.
What did it actually...
It removed presidential term limits entirely. He could be president for life. He replaced direct public elections with a rubber stamp electoral college called the National Council for Unification.
So the public couldn't vote for him anymore.
Right. And it gave the president the power to personally appoint 1/3 of the parliament.
So he rigged the game so he could never lose?
Completely. They held a national referendum on this new constitution under martial law, and it passed with 92% of the vote.
Which was obviously manufactured.
Of course. And his justification to the public was, look, we're in a state of national emergency. The North is threatening us. The U.S. is leaving us. We cannot afford the luxury and inefficiency of Western democracy right now.
He called it Korean-style democracy.
Yes, which basically meant I decide everything for the good of the nation.
And to enforce this, he issued these infamous emergency decrees.
They were draconian. Emergency Decree Number 9, for example, made it a severe criminal offense to even criticize the Yushin Constitution.
Just to say you didn't like it.
You could get 15 years in a brutal prison just for mentioning that the Constitution should be revised.
Right.
The KCIA was everywhere, on campuses, in newsrooms, in factories.
But at the exact same time he is doing this, he also tries to win over the rural population with something called the Semal Undong.
The New Village movement, yes.
What was that about?
This was the rural counterpart to the industrial drive in the cities. The countryside was still lagging way behind in poverty. So Park launched this massive nationwide campaign. The government essentially provided raw materials like cement and steel rebar to every single village in the country.
Just gave it to them.
Yes, but they didn't provide any labor or funding to pay workers. They said to the villagers, we are giving you the materials. Now you must organize yourselves to build a new bridge, widen the road, replace your thatched roofs with modern tile.
So it was like gamified development?
It was a brilliantly manipulative system. If a village used their allotment of cement efficiently and showed visible progress, the government gave them double the materials the next year.
And if they didn't?
If they wasted it, or the village leaders couldn't motivate the people, they got absolutely nothing the next year. It sparked a fierce, sometimes ruthless competition between neighboring villages.
Did it work?
Economically, yes.
Yeah.
It radically modernized the physical infrastructure of the Korean countryside and raised agricultural incomes. But politically, it was a tool for total mobilization. It destroyed traditional village hierarchies and replaced them with absolute state loyalty to Park.
Wow. Okay, so now we are in the middle of this hardening, paranoid dictatorship. And then something truly tragic happens that changes Park deeply on a personal level. We are in 1974 now.
August 15, 1974,
Yeah.
National Liberation Day. It's a huge televised ceremony at the National Theater in Seoul.
And Park is at the podium giving a speech.
Right. And a man named Mun Sig-wang, who was a pro-North Korean sympathizer living in Japan, manages to enter the theater with a loaded revolver.
How does an assassin get a gun into a room with the president?
It was a catastrophic security failure. He used forged documents. During the speech, he stands up from his seat near the back to shoot Park, but he's nervous. As he draws the gun, he accidentally shoots himself in the leg.
Oh, wow.
But he keeps going. He runs down the center aisle, limping and firing towards the stage.
It must have been absolute pandemonium in there.
Total chaos. A bullet actually hits the podium, missing Park by just inches. Park ducks down behind the heavy wooden lectern.
But the First Lady was there too.
Yes, Yuk Young-soo. She was sitting right behind him on the stage. And one of the assassin's bullets strikes her directly in the head.
Oh, God.
She collapses instantly. Security agents rush the stage. They tackle the gunman and they carry the First Lady off. She's bleeding incredibly heavily. And this is the moment that truly defines Park's psychology from that day forward.
What does he do?
The podium is right there. The gunfire's barely stopped. Park stands back up. He adjusts his glasses. He gathers his scattered notes. He drinks a sip of water from a glass on the podium. And he continues the speech.
While his wife is effectively dying backstage.
Yes. The audience in the theater is literally sobbing. They just watched the mother of the nation get shot in the head. But Park finishes the speech.
That is intensely stoic.
It cemented his public image as a man of sheer steel. Someone who put the state and his duty above absolutely everything, even his own family. But privately,
he must have been destroyed.
He was completely shattered. She died later that evening at the hospital.
And she was the popular one, wasn't she? Like the softening element of his regime.
She was his anchor. People loved her. She was known to be gentle, charitable, and she was the only one who could tell Park hard truths without getting fired or arrested.
So when she died, he lost his connection to reality.
Exactly. The regime lost its soft face. Park became incredibly isolated. He stopped listening to any moderate advice. He became more paranoid. He started drinking heavily. The Blue House became a very lonely, very gloomy fortress.
And his eldest daughter had to step in, right? Park Chung Hee.
Imagine that situation. She was 22 years old, studying in France. She has to abandon her life, fly back to Seoul, and step into the role of acting First Lady.
Sitting next to her grieving, hardening dictator father at official state dinners.
It was an immense burden, and it completely set the stage for her own tragic political career decades later when she became president.
Right. So we move into the late 70s, part 4 of our deep dive, the unraveling. The economy is starting to look shaky, the dictator is isolated, and the geopolitical world is shifting again.
The external pressure was mounting incredibly fast. Jimmy Carter became the U.S. president in 1977.
And Carter was a major human rights crusader.
He hated Park. He openly called him a dictator. Carter actually campaigned on a promise to withdraw all U.S. ground troops from South Korea if Park didn't immediately improve human rights and release political prisoners.
So Park is cornered. What does he do? He decides to go nuclear.
Literally. Project 890.
I couldn't believe this part of the sources.
It's heavily documented now. Park authorized a highly secret government program to build a Korean nuclear bomb.
Because he felt he couldn't trust the U.S. to protect him anymore.
Exactly. If Carter is leaving, Korea needs the ultimate deterrent against the North. And South Korea was actually very, very close to getting the necessary reprocessing technology from France.
That is a terrifying what-if scenario. A rogue, nuclear-armed South Korea in the late 70s.
The U.S. intelligence agencies found out about it, and Washington went absolutely ballistic. They essentially forced France to cancel the contracts, and they threatened to completely crush the Korean economy, cut off all loans, all trade, if Park didn't stop the program immediately.
So Park had to back down.
He did, but the relationship with the United States was entirely poisoned at that point.
And domestically, things were exploding at the exact same time.
The economy was overheating, you had rampant inflation from the heavy industry drive, and the labor movement, which had been brutally suppressed for almost 2 decades, started to snap.
The sources mention a specific protest in 1979, the YH Trading Company.
Yes. YH Trading was a wig manufacturing company. The management abruptly shut down the factory and laid off all the female workers without paying their back wages.
So the women protested.
They occupied the headquarters of the main opposition political party to stage a sit-in, hoping the politicians would protect them.
How did the government handle it? I mean, ideally you negotiate, right?
Under Park, you don't negotiate. He sent in over 1,000 riot police. They stormed the opposition party building with clubs and tear gas. During the massive brawl, one young female worker fell, or was pushed, it's heavily debated, out of a window to her death.
That is awful.
It sparked national outrage. The leader of the opposition party, Kim Young-sam, loudly criticized Park to the international press. So Park had him illegally expelled from the National Assembly.
Which was the final straw for the public.
Exactly. The city of Busan, which was Kim Young-sam's political stronghold and hometown, absolutely exploded. This became known as the Busan protests.
Was it just students?
No, that was the terrifying part for the regime. It was students, factory workers, middle-class shop owners, ordinary citizens. They were burning police stations. They were fighting riot police in the streets. It was a full-scale regional uprising. The regime was visibly tottering.
And this leads us directly to the Shakespearean tragedy of the inner circle, the court of King Park.
You really have to picture the toxic dynamic inside the Blue House in late October 1979. Park is aging, he's exhausted, and he's surrounded by yes men.
But there are two main rivals fighting for his favor, right?
On one side, you have Cha Ji-chul, the chief of the Presidential Security Service, the chief bodyguard.
What kind of guy was he?
A brute, a complete hardliner. He tightly controlled all physical access to the president, and he was the devil on Park's shoulder. He was telling Park, "Your Excellency, do not worry about these protests in Busan."
What was his solution?
He explicitly cited Cambodia. He said, "The Khmer Rouge killed 3 million people to maintain order. We can easily kill 1 or 2 million protesters here with tanks. It's not a big deal."
That is chilling. He was casually advocating for mass slaughter of his own citizens.
Essentially, yes. He thought extreme military force solved absolutely everything.
And on the other side?
On the other side, you have Kim Jae-gyu, the director of the KCIA.
The chief spy.
Right. But paradoxically, in this specific dynamic, Kim was the moderate one.
The head of the secret police was the moderate.
Because his agents were out in the streets. He was reading the daily intelligence reports. He sensed the actual mood of the public. He told Park, "Your Excellency, the people are genuinely angry. It's not just a few communist agitators. We need to compromise. We need to reform. We cannot just shoot thousands of citizens."
So the spy chief is the dove, and the bodyguard is the hawk.
Yes. And Park was siding with the hawk.
Because he was humiliated.
He was deeply humiliated by the protests. He thought Kim Jae-gyu was being weak and incompetent.
And Cha Ji-chul was taking advantage of that.
Shaw was bullying Kim Jae-gyu relentlessly. He was treating the KCIA director like a lowly servant in front of the president, and Park was just sitting back and letting it happen.
So Kim Jae-gyu feels cornered.
He felt his political career was over, he felt his actual life might be in danger from Cha, and he genuinely believed the country was heading toward a horrific bloodbath if Cha convinced Park to send the army into Busan.
Which brings us to the climax of the story. Part 5. The assassination. October 26, 1979. Set the scene for us.
It's a Friday night. Park wants to relax after a stressful week. He goes to a highly secure KCIA safe house in the Gunjung-dong neighborhood, right near the Blue House. It's a private, very exclusive dinner.
Who is exactly in the room?
Just 4 men initially. President Park, Chief Bodyguard Cha Ji-chul, KCIA Director Kim Jae-gyu, and the Chief Presidential Secretary Kim Ga-won.
And they brought in entertainment, right?
Yes, 2 young women were brought in. A famous pop singer named Sim Subong, and a college student.
What was their role?
They were there to pour drinks, play the guitar, and sing songs for the president. It was a private drinking party. They were drinking Chivas Regal whiskey.
What was the mood like at the table?
Incredibly tense. Extremely toxic. Cha Ji-chul started verbally attacking Kim Jae-gyu almost immediately, saying things like, "Why is the KCIA so incompetent? Why can't you stop these riots in Busan?"
And Park?
Park joined in. He started scolding Kim as well, saying, "You've lost your edge, you're not doing your job."
They were literally poking the bear.
They were humiliating a man who controlled a vast intelligence network and who was armed.
So what happens?
Around 7:20 p.m., Kim Jae-gyu quietly excuses himself from the table. He walks out of the dining room, goes to the bathroom, and then goes up to his private office on the 2nd floor of the safe house.
And he retrieves a weapon.
He retrieves a pistol, a German Walther PPK. He checks a magazine, puts it in his waistband, and walks back downstairs.
Had he made the decision right then to kill them?
He mustn't. Because before he went back into the dining room, he met with his closest KCIA subordinates in the garden outside. He told them, "I'm going to finish it today. If you hear gunshots inside, you immediately kill the presidential bodyguards waiting in the kitchen."
Wow.
He goes back in, he sits down, the drinking continues. The singer is singing sad traditional songs. The insults from Chade continue.
The tension must have been unbearable.
Finally, around 7:40 p.m., Kim Jae-gyu snaps. The historical records are very clear on his exact movements. He looks directly at President Park, then he points at the bodyguard, Cha Ji-chul, and he screams, "Your Excellency, how can you conduct politics with a worm like this?"
A worm like this!
And he pulls the trigger. Bang! He shoots Cha Ji-chul.
Does he kill him?
No. The bullet hits Cha's arm or wrist. Cha was entirely unarmed. Ironically, presidential bodyguards were strictly forbidden from carrying firearms in the exact presence of the president.
So Cha is bleeding.
Cha panics and runs toward the bathroom to hide.
And what does Park do?
Park tries to intervene. He yells something like, "What are you doing?" Kim Jae-gyu turns the Walther PPK directly on his boss of 18 years.
And fires.
Bang! He shoots President Park right in the chest. The bullet pierces his lung. Park immediately slumps forward over the table.
The dictator is down.
But the room descends into absolute chaos. Kim Jae-gyu tries to shoot Cha again, but the gun jams?
A mechanical failure.
Right. The room is suddenly full of thick gunpowder smoke. The two young women are screaming in terror. Kim Jae-gyu frantically tries to clear the jam, fails, and runs out of the dining room to find another weapon.
This is so chaotic. It's not some smooth, calculated assassin movie scene.
It's incredibly messy. He runs into the hallway, grabs a .38 caliber revolver from one of his KCIA agents who had just finished shooting the bodyguards in the kitchen.
And he goes back in.
He walks back into the dining room. Cha Ji-chul is crawling out of the bathroom trying to grab a small wooden cabinet to use as a shield. Kim walks up and shoots Cha point blank in the abdomen. Cha goes down, dead.
And Park?
Kim walks over to President Park. Park is slumped over, bleeding profusely, being held by the terrified college student. Kim places the barrel of the revolver right against Park's head and fires. Execution style.
God, it's over. 18 years of absolute rule ended just like that in a safe house dining room.
But the aftermath is just as chaotic. Kim Jae-gyu is in a total daze. He doesn't immediately declare martial law or take over the government broadcast stations like Park did back in 1961.
What does he do?
He grabs the Army Chief of Staff, who was actually having dinner in a different building in the same compound, and they speed off in a car to the Army headquarters. But Kim is so panicked, he doesn't explicitly tell the general that he was the one who killed the president.
What does he say?
He just keeps repeating, something huge happened, the president is dead.
And meanwhile, back at the safe house, what happens to Park's body?
The surviving secretary and the KCIA agents rush Park's body to the nearby military hospital. The head doctor on duty, a man named Kim Byung-soo, sees a man carried in completely covered in blood.
Did he know who it was?
He didn't recognize him at first because of the blood and the damage. It was only when the frantic security agents asked, "Is he dead?" and then whispered, "Is Code 1 dead?"
Code 1.
Met the president. The doctor completely froze. He checked the pulse, and he confirmed that Park Chung Hee was gone.
When was Kim Jae-gyu finally caught?
Later that very same night. Once the cabinet hastily gathered at the military bunker, the chief secretary, who had been in the dining room and witnessed the entire execution, finally cracked under the pressure. He pulled the defense minister aside and said, "It was Kim Jae-gyu."
So the military turns on him.
The army immediately arrested Kim Jae-gyu. He was put on trial and eventually executed by hanging a few months later.
To this day, people still passionately debate why he really did it.
Right.
Was it just a sudden burst of extreme anger? Or was it a calculated patriotic move to save democracy?
That is the million-dollar question. Kim claimed at his trial, very eloquently actually, that he did it entirely to restore democracy and to prevent the impending slaughter of thousands of innocent civilians in Busan.
A martyr for democracy.
That's how his defenders see him. But others, especially conservatives, say it was nothing but a petty, desperate power struggle that he was losing against Cha Ji-chul, and he snapped to save his own position. Historically, it's probably a very messy combination of both.
So, let's zoom out here. We have gone from the impoverished rice paddies of Gumi to the Japanese military academy, the midnight coup on the bridge, the economic miracle, the torture chambers, and finally, the bloody end. How do we even begin to assess Park Chung Hee today?
It's arguably the most difficult question in modern Korean history. You have to look at the balance sheet.
Let's look at the credit side first.
On the credit side, the miracle on the Han River. It is undeniable. He took a country with absolutely nothing, no capital, no resources, traumatized by war, and built a modern industrial powerhouse.
The steel mills, the shipyards, the expressways.
They are real. They physically exist. They lifted millions of people out of crushing poverty. The massive, prosperous middle class of South Korea today literally exists because of the economic foundation laid by those ruthless policies.
But the debit side of that ledger is incredibly heavy.
Extremely heavy. Democracy was totally suspended. Thousands of citizens were tortured. Innocent people were executed on entirely false spy charges just to maintain fear.
Labor rights were completely crushed.
Right. And it created a culture of rigid, military-style hierarchy that still deeply pervades South Korean corporate and political culture today.
And this ties back to the academic papers we read on developmental state theory.
Exactly. The core debate in those papers is whether that soft authoritarianism, or in Park's case, hard authoritarianism, was actually necessary to force rapid economic growth in the early stages of development.
The idea that the state acted like a very strict paternalistic father.
Right, forcing the children to study and work hard for their own future benefit, even if they hated it at the time.
Do the scholars agree with that?
It's very split. But many critics, and I tend to agree with this analysis, argue that the Korean people worked incredibly hard because they themselves desperately wanted a better life, not just because a dictator was holding a gun to their heads.
The people are the miracle, not the dictator.
Exactly. And furthermore, the intense political brutality in the 1970s actually destabilized the economy by creating massive social unrest. The oppression became a liability, not an asset.
And yet, his legacy is still very much alive and admired by many.
Absolutely. The conservative political factions in Korea still view him as a foundational hero.
I mean, his own daughter, Park Chung Hee, was elected president in 2012.
Yes, and her election was driven heavily by deep nostalgia among the older generation for her father's era of rapid growth and strict order. Though, of course, she was later impeached and removed from office in a massive corruption scandal.
History echoing itself. And you mentioned earlier, outside of Korea, he is still a major influence. Specifically, the transcript we have from Prabowo Subianto in Indonesia.
Yes. In our sources, Prabowo explicitly cites Park Chung Hee as a primary role model for national development.
Why does a modern Indonesian leader look back to a 1970s Korean dictator?
Because Prabowo and many other leaders in the global south look at the strongman plus development model. They see a narrative of clean governance, at least relative to other developing nations, strict military discipline, and rapid state-led industrialization.
They see a blueprint that works.
Exactly. It shows that for many nations, the Seoul model is far more attractive than the Washington model of liberal democracy. They want the rapid economic growth, and they are fully willing to tolerate or even desire the authoritarian strongman to get it.
Which leaves us with that final, incredibly uncomfortable question for you, the listener, to mull over. Can you ever truly separate the economic miracle from the political monster?
Or are they fundamentally two sides of the exact same coin?
Park clearly believed they were completely inseparable. He genuinely believed he was the necessary evil for his nation's survival.
Whether history ultimately forgives him for the blood on his hands, well, that is something every single Korean generation grapples with to this day.
A fascinating, dark, and endlessly complex figure. Thank you for listening. Do not forget to click like and subscribe and write your opinion in the comments section.